There we go. Oh, I meant to ask you, are there any titles before your name that you care about?
No.
Okay, so we're just going to throw the on there. The Andre Henry. Welcome to the Can I Say This at Church podcast, man. I'm glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
You don't know this, but I've stalked you on the internet for many, many years.
Oh, you're a very good stalker because I did not realize that.
I don't comment. I don't comment on anything. I just try to learn. I try to learn how to shut my mouth on the
So you're a
internet
purist.
and just read. Well, even like my wife. So yesterday was my son's birthday, and
Mm.
she's like, "Are you not even going to put anything on Facebook?" I was like, "Mm-mm. I'm tired of sharing my kid with the rest of this planet that doesn't know him. So you're welcome to post this picture, but I'm not putting anything on Facebook." So, um, but no, a thank you though for your Facebook. So in the middle of the pandemic, I was an essential worker, and
Mm.
one of the things that was my joy for about 2 weeks was when you were just like, you know what I'm
Oh,
gonna do? I'm just gonna, if you want to listen, I'm just gonna DJ some music, and you were my drive home for
oh
like I don't know,
man.
like 2 weeks or something. And then I think probably
Yeah.
Facebook or music licensing rights or something
Yeah.
said, yeah, you're done
Yeah.
playing
Facebook
music on
shut
the
me
internet.
down.
Yeah.
Facebook shut me down.
But thank you for that.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's my
not
pleasure. Like, I mean, I love DJing. It's one of my favorite things in the world.
mhm.
And just to be able to kind of show up while we were all, I mean, that was a scary time, right? Like, it's feeling
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
unpredictable. Just to be able to kind of show up and share
Yeah.
some music was super
I
fun.
I work at a bank, and so we weren't the banks aren't legally allowed to shut down more than 2 days. Like
Mm,
that's like it's like you can't do that.
mm,
Which is why they're open on Saturdays because there are federal holidays on Mondays. So
mm.
um so I just hated life. I forget where I was in front of a Best Buy driving home, and I'm like, "What is this? Yes, give me this." So,
Mhm.
anyway, so thank you again for that. So when you try to tell people like what an Henry yeah, what an Andre is, what is that? Like, what's the answer to that?
Yeah, I would tell people that I am a singer-songwriter or musician, however you want to say that. Sometimes I add author, activist, but they all are part of the same work to me, you know?
Fair enough. Um, what's the difference between a singer songwriter and a musician?
Well, one is just more specific, right? Because if I say musician, it's like, okay, well, do you play the harp? You know, like I don't, what does that, what does it mean, right? So sometimes I'm just more specific so people understand,
Yeah.
a little bit more what that looks like for me.
Yeah, I play a five-string banjo and a harp, and that's it. That's it. If you
Yeah,
can't play those, you don't count.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm an expert at the spoons, like
I
that's
I cannot play the spoons. I've
no,
tried many a time.
yeah,
Yeah, can't.
I'm joking, but that's why I sometimes make that distinction.
Yeah. Um yeah, no, that's good. Uh so can I say I have carried your book around with me, I don't know, since your publisher sent it to me. So if they're listening, thanks for sending that. Or if it wasn't you, but maybe it was with your permission. Either way, don't care. And I have enjoyed living in and around and working in Charlottesville. The look on
Oh
people's
wow.
faces as I'll sit here and do this job, you know,
Just
on
hold
the
it up so
on the
people
lunch
can
break. Well,
read
I'm
the
actually
title.
reading it though. Um, so so just addressing the elephant in the room because I have been doing this on your behalf for like weeks as I read through this book, especially like leaving it at work on the break table,
Hmm.
just sitting there like nobody don't steal my book, but flip through it if you want. Um, what is this? Like
What is this?
I have read the whole book, so I'm aware of what it is, but
It's a funny question. I love the way you ask that question. All right, man. Just um, I mean, it's a good question though because from the title, I think that it is misleading, and I don't mind it being a little bit misleading about what people are going to get when they pick up this book. So this book is really a it's like a manual around civil resistance. It's like what you need to know about taking practical action against systemic racism.
mm,
But it is in the frame of a memoir.
mm,
Okay. So it's like it's a little bit of memoir, it's a little bit manifesto. And every chapter, I tell a story from my own life, my own journey of political awakening, my own journey into learning about nonviolent struggle, and me looking for my place in the struggle for Black liberation to illuminate some principle about social progress that we've probably not been taught,
Hmm.
or we probably haven't heard of in the dominant common sense around how social progress happens.
Hmm. Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah. It is the way that I have described it to people in my own words is it's a story about the realization that it's not my job to make you understand things that bother me,
Mm-hmm.
but you should probably ask about them.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I've been explaining it. I don't know if that's a good paraphrase or not, but that's what I've been telling people.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe it's wrong. Doesn't matter because it's what I think, and that's relativism. That's where we live.
Uh,
Um, so you use the word apocalyptic quite a bit throughout the book,
yes.
um, and I think when people hear that word, we get some prosperity gospel preachers, we get some Benny Hinn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some Bethel music mixed in,
Uh-huh.
with the way that
Yep.
Jesus is coming soon, and let's do this thing. How are you using the word apocalyptic? Because I think it kind of changes the lens for the entire text.
For sure. Yeah, I use apocalypse in a way that I feel is more faithful to the folks who first used that word in the first century.
Mm-hmm.
The Greek word apocalypsos means to unveil or to reveal. And the most famous of those, it was a, deeply political genre back in the day. And the writers of these apocalypses wanted to say something about society and about the way that power is being used in society in a way that probably kept them safe from being persecuted for that. And in a way that evoked images of liberation that their audiences would have been familiar with, like in the most famous apocalypse that we know of, the Book of Revelation in the Bible. Um, the writer, John, a political prisoner in Rome, uh, evokes all this imagery from the Exodus story and
Mm-hmm.
from Daniel and all these things to kind of paint a political cartoon of Caesar and the Roman Empire. Um, in 2016, I compared the Book of Revelation to these random statues of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton naked in New York City that randomly popped up. I don't know if you remember that in the news, but like
I do.
some
I do.
some artists randomly,
It was you.
yeah, okay, the cat's out the bag. Uh, it was not me. I'm not going to take credit for it, but but it's fun to pretend. That so this artist made these figures of Donald Trump. I think was the first one, and I think that Donald Trump's uh, manhood was very small in that sculpture, and I think the artist did that for a reason, like to get us to talk about what that might mean. But anyway, I feel like John is doing a similar thing to that in the way that John is painting the Roman Empire and Caesar in the Book of Revelation. And he's doing that because his neighbors, who are subjugated people who live under the subjugation of the violent empire of Rome, are actually starting to worship Caesar. And he writes this apocalypse as an intervention against that. And just a couple things I want to add. A couple things I want to add there is not only does he unveil the monstrous nature of the Roman Empire, he also paints this vision of a world that could be without those types of systems. And many people, we talk about how like this was probably written to response to a lot of to Christian persecution, right? To Christians being persecuted in the first century. There's some historians that they argue that Christians were not facing widespread persecution or severe persecution at that time. But regardless, there's only one person named in the Book of Revelation that's been killed, the Antipas. And so, in my imagination, sometimes I wonder if, in a similar way that Black people like myself watched the news, saw people like ourselves dying, being killed, all this other kind of stuff, and it spurred this moment, if the murder of this one man Antipas was enough to provoke John's imagination to say deaths like these are an indictment on the entire system. It's emblematic of something more.
Yeah.
And to say the only way to respond to this is for us to dismantle systems like these and to imagine an entirely new world.
Yeah.
I'm kind of hoping that my book does a similar kind of work for Black people who find themselves also like very much operating unknowingly, unwittingly, uh, under the spell of America's, version of Pax Romana,
Mhm.
America's self-portrait of itself, where we have been so subjugated that we also believe that we are a part of this anti-Black society in a way that we just can't participate. And I
Mhm.
mentioned in the first chapter, which I know I'm taking a really long time on this question, but this is the
The
last
whole house is asleep. The floor is
thing.
yours.
um, that support for Donald Trump, for instance, went up among Black and Latino males between 2016 and 2020,
Yeah.
right? Apocalypses are meant to disrupt that kind of dynamic where subjugated people are like their oppressor's biggest fans.
Yeah. Yeah, leaning into unveiling a little bit more. And I feel
Mhm.
like I forget what podcast it was, or maybe it was a book. I don't know. I've read a lot of crap and I have no idea what's my own thoughts anymore. I don't know if you ever struggle with, like, I
Yeah,
literally
I
have
do.
no, I'm like, I feel like that's original, but
Yeah,
I probably stole that.
yeah.
Matter of fact, I told my wife, I was like, if I ever write a book or anything, it's going to be like a thing at the beginning. Like, if I missed an attribution at trip, I don't know how that word works. If I
Attribution.
missed it,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it. Um, please email me and we'll do the Kindle version and we'll
I
edit it in as we go because I'm pretty sure that I stole every single one of these
totally
words.
get where you're coming from.
So when things are being unveiled, specifically with racism, and I can say you were talking about like reading the book from a lens of a black person,
Mhm.
which for those watching the video, I am not a black person. I'm bald, mostly white person. And so with that, unveiling, I think, is both systemic, but it's also deeply personal.
Yeah.
And so, what does that kind of look like for folks, whether or not they're reading the book? And to be clear, we're just going to time out right here. I read your book twice. Like one
Oh,
time I read it
yeah.
in one sitting, and then
Mhm.
I took it with me to Tennessee on vacation over the last week. And I read it again intentionally while my kids out there fishing and playing with the kids, just
Mhm.
slowly reading it. But unveiling is different because like I see myself in many of the stories of the people. Like I see myself in Kevin.
Oh,
I see myself in your adoptive family, not adoptive, but
yeah.
if it's chapter 3 or chapter 2 or something like
Mhm.
that. Like
Mhm.
especially when Facebook memories pop up, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh damn, did I say that? Holy hell! I don't even recognize the person that I was.
Yeah.
But that's a different kind of unveiling.
Mhm.
So how do we separate out unveiling of those structures, the systemic structures, both
Mhm.
at a personal level versus the grander macro level?
I don't think that we need to separate them because they are connected. And that's a huge part of the chapter about the personal and the political. And that's why, like, I think to many people's surprise, like, I start telling you this story in the beginning, and I'm like, when I was a kid, this was my biggest fear. And by the end of that chapter, I'm talking about the rise of global fascism, right? Like, there,
Covered a lot of ground.
there, that's the intro. The they are connected in a very deep way, and there is a way in which, okay, so Frantz Fanon, a revolutionary philosopher, writer, psychotherapist who inspired the work, in many ways, or influenced the thinking of Malcolm X and the Black Panthers and so on. In one of his books, he writes about how the struggle for liberation, it transforms those who are participating in it, you know, on a personal level, and also influences the oppressed as a group, changes the values, changes culture. And so I think that's just a nature of, not just those who are struggling for liberation, but basically what I'm saying is those macro things, they shape us individually. They shape the way that we think, right? And a
Mhm.
part of that waking up, that unveiling, is we discover the ways that we have been formed and shaped by that domination system and the ways that we were trained to support it and to participate in it unthinkingly. And then, yeah, you and I will probably look at, I mean, our Facebook memories and say, "Oh my
Mm.
gosh, like I used to think that way. I used to say those kinds of things. I really
Mm.
believe that."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you delete them? I started deleting them, and then I stopped because I was like, no, these need to stay there. I don't know.
um,
What do you do?
I I haven't seen anything like super like, like
Mm.
problematic. There's
Yeah.
no pictures of me in like a Klan robe or anything like that.
No, I don't mean
In the
pictures,
past.
like just words. So I grew up, just for some context, like ultra conservative in Southwest Texas.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, there's a lot that you could wrap into. Like picture Ted Cruz, but a Ted Cruz that's willing to admit that my name is Raphael. Like
Ah.
in it, instead of trying to disembody from that. So like some of
Yeah.
the stuff I used to say,
I
oh,
mean, there's some things that I just feel like, okay, there may come a time where someone finds an old sermon of mine and is like, "Man, Andre, you really were like pretty patriarchal in that sermon." I'm gonna be like, "Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I thought then."
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
I've grown. I've changed.
Yeah.
I've theosist. Yeah. For we'll stick with the Greek words. Um, yeah. So gaslighting is a word that gets thrown around a lot. And I don't think it's a word that a lot of people understand the meaning of.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of people throw in gaslighting when they feel like they've lost the point, and they're
Mhm.
like, "Well, now I just want to take ownership of this."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
which I've also thought about kind of possibly gaslighting those old Facebook memories and just like making it be like memes about Taco Bell, but not editing any comments, so that when people, and then resharing it. So, so just at a high level, what is gaslighting and how does it relate to kind of systemic racism and the systems that we live in, you and I?
Yeah, so gaslighting is an abuse tactic where the abuser is trying to get the target to, well, basically trying to undermine the target's perception of reality.
Hmm.
And it seems like the ultimate goal is really to get the target to accept the abuser's version of the story, whatever that is. Comes from
Hmm.
a play from the 1930s where a man was doing this to his wife, messing around with her gas powered lights and telling her they're only flickering in her head. And this happens around many social justice issues, issues of power. But when it comes to racism, there is this thing that happens in the white world, and by the white world I mean those nations that were built uh, through European colonialism,
Hmm.
and that used anti-black violence, which is a very, I guess, abstract way of me saying enslavement, the breaking of black bodies to build their societies by trying to cover up that information. Um, I use the example of me growing up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, where the Ku Klux Klan was reborn, and going to Stone Mountain Park as a kid, and there being no mention of the Klan's ties to Stone Mountain Park. Someone listening might be like, "What Klan ties to Stone Mountain Park?" Well, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
that is where the Ku Klux Klan was reborn. you
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
um,
Well, when I read that chapter, we had recently learned about we. I did not learn about Stone Mountain growing up in Texas, because Texas is a big enough state that the history book is whatever we say it is, and McGraw Hill's just going to make it so.
mhm,
So you're welcome, America. The Texans, Texas writes a lot of the history. Regardless,
yeah,
so I didn't know anything about it,
mhm,
until I was helping my son in his seventh grade history class, and they were talking about it, but they didn't talk about any of this stuff. Like the stuff about that you're about to say. Um, your book is the first time I read it, and I was like,
wow,
I've like
yeah. I
like
mean,
I went to school at Liberty. Another fun. That's fun. Like I would ride out to Appomattox and learn all about Lee surrendering out there, and like
yeah,
VMI and Robert E. Lee are like buried down where Stonewall Jackson is buried, like just down the street in Lexington. Like
right.
I was like, why did I not know any of this? But anyway, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
I mean, yeah, I mean, but that's exactly a part of my point is that I grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, and I never heard
Mm,
that the Ku Klux Klan was reborn on that rock that I hiked up that rock, several times,
just a nice hike.
in my life. Yeah, it's a decent walk. You know what I'm saying? And there's a huge the largest Confederate monument in the country, and the largest bas relief carving in the world is on that rock, and it is a depiction of Stonewall Jackson, General Lee, and Jefferson Davis on horseback, majestically looking into their futures, I suppose. But this carving was the idea of Klan sympathizers, and the idea for the original design was to have just General Lee and a parade of Klansmen. That was the original idea. And the only reason that it wasn't that is because the designer felt like it was beneath his talents to do. He was not morally opposed to it. He just
Isn't it
felt
the
like
same guy that did Mount Rushmore though?
exactly. Yes, he's the same guy who did Mount Rushmore, and he was like,
That's not in the book. I don't remember reading
yeah, yeah.
that.
He wanted to do something with more pizzazz, basically, and that was his idea, was that I would do this Confederate generals. So anyway, I talked about gaslighting
Funny.
on a systemic level because let's bring it back down to the personal and then go back up. On the personal level, some tactics of gaslighting include like lying, deflecting, projecting, hiding information, minimizing someone's feelings when they try to tell you about it. And so, all right, back up to the macro level. They're literally revising textbooks, hiding information,
Mm,
neglecting and lying about the cause of the Civil War. That's why this type of iconography emerged in the first place, was to reframe the motivation behind the Civil War, to say that this was not about keeping slavery
mm.
as a
No,
practice.
it's states' rights. You know, it's
Yeah, it states rights. This
absolutely.
was a legitimate uprising against, big government,
Mm,
federal overreach, all that kind of thing. And this type of gaslighting is continuing today with the book bannings and the book burnings and the demonizing of CRT, of critical race theory, and mislabeling all kinds of things critical race theory, because this is a huge, well, this is a favorite tactic, I should say, of the white power structure, is to say racism is not a problem here.
yeah, yeah. I'm skipping around in your chapters. Am I allowed to? Can I quote your own book back to you?
For
Is
sure.
that a thing that we're allowed to do? Okay. Um, so there is a chapter. I don't know what chapter it is. It's "We Can All Be White" is the name
Yeah.
of the chapter,
Uh-huh.
which did reframe some things for me. And you quote someone in here. Is it Willie James Jennings?
Willie Jennings, yeah.
Is talking about the fusion of white identity and Christianity had been an essential part of the evolution of patriarchy, racism, and the climate crisis when he liberated himself from his notes for a moment. And he says, anyone can be white, friends. And then you go on to say a little bit more about that. But you
Hmm.
put in here, he continued, no one is born white. There's no white biology. Whiteness, he explained, is a way of thinking and being in the world,
Yeah.
which that's not the way I think most people operate in the world. And I think that may be new information for many people listening,
Hmm.
or that have not read Willie James Jennings.
Yes.
I have not read that book, but I was challenged by Professor Soon-Chong Ra a few years ago to
Yeah.
only buy books from people for a while that were not people that look like me,
Mhm.
which has shattered my view of the world in a good way, and in the best ways. But what are you, I guess, and Willie getting at there?
Yeah, and I would also say that many Black writers have made this point. Malcolm X, James Baldwin, and others, have made this point as well, that race can be a very complex conversation to have, because usually when we start talking about racism, what people say is, "Oh, well, I don't care about skin color." And it's like, yeah, skin color is a part of the conversation about race, but it's not actually that is actually not the way that you can wrap the whole thing up in a bow, right?
Mm,
Like it can't be contained in that one thing. It's not just about skin color. um, Really, racism is about human hierarchy, if we want to make it a little bit more abstract, right? And we can take, and basically that human hierarchy became, in a sense, color coded, right?
mm,
To where whiteness became conflated with humanity, right? But when we talk about what whiteness is, it is kind of buying into those assumptions about human superiority, right? So we don't say that, because your skin is lighter than mine, you're bad. Like that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about whiteness. We're talking about the ideas that colonizers, slaveholders, all of them, that they came, theologians, philosophers, even scientists, back in the day, were coming up with all of these discourses to justify the oppression of Black people and the intentional, structural privileging, which is not a word, but we're going to go with it,
I like it.
privileging of of uh, of European people and European descended people, specifically those of wealth, right? And it's hard for me to explain, and I'm so glad that like I have the book so I can just say, all right, read that chapter, because
Mhm.
I had a lot more time to like really hammer that out there.
Chapter
But
6. I cheated.
yes. So, but when we're talking about whiteness, we're talking about that. It is those lies that have been passed down about the superiority of those people who descend from that, who live in that caste, rather, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And operating under those assumptions that, for instance, like the blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman is the standard of beauty, and classical music is the best form, the most sophisticated form of music out there, and
Mhm.
English is inherently a more intelligible and refined language than
Well, that's
African
absolutely untrue.
and Christian.
English is like the worst
Right,
language. It is the hardest
right.
to learn. It's
Right,
ridiculous.
and European, traditions of Christianity are more spiritually valid than indigenous spiritualities and all this kind of stuff. All of these
Mhm.
things are they seem kind of like subtle forms of white supremacy when I'm just saying them with words, but when you think about the violence that has been done, uh, and justified by those lies, then I think you really start to see kind of the contours of whiteness that I'm talking about. And to the question, I think that the title of that chapter raises, it's like when I say that, anyone can be white, anyone can agree with these tenets,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
you don't have to have light skin to believe that blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fair-skinned women are inherently more beautiful than dark-skinned, kinky-haired, brown-eyed women, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to have light skin to believe that John Calvin is inherently more in tune with spiritual truth than
Only 5 of them.
Nat Turner, you
Yeah.
know, um, and so on and so forth. So anyone can kind of believe that they are white. However, not everyone can be identified as white, because that's
Yeah.
where we get back to the color coded thing. So you can be a Black person, a Mexican person, an Asian American person, and you can ascribe to all of these ideas about white superiority. But when the police stop you, when they pull you over in a traffic stop, you know, then we'll see how white you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you find, or why do you so you've had more of these, so I am privileged enough that I don't have to deal with the rough conversations that you've ripped apart in all of these chapters. Like I inherently get a pass because I just do. Doesn't make it right. It just makes it a lot easier. Which means I have to choose uncomfortable situations for growth,
Mhm.
instead of ambivalence and apathy. Um, why is the power that comes with that privilege so seductive to people, regardless of the melanin count in their skin?
Yeah. Well, I think that you've already hinted at it, is that it's it's dangerous because um you can passively support this domination system, this violent status quo, literally just by excusing yourself from the conversation.
Mm, mm,
One thing that I say to people is that um, I say it all the time, is that history is not a story that's happening to us, it's one that we're writing together.
mm,
And we write it through collective action. Um, but we are so essential to that story that when we choose not to act, that also becomes a part of the narrative, that becomes a part of the story, that becomes a part of history. And we know this because when we look back at some of the big atrocities in the world, we always ask the question, what was everybody else doing, right?
mm,
We
mm,
know that the majority, you know, um, we know that there were a bunch of people, living in Nazi Germany that were not actively shoving people into, gas chambers and things like that.
Mhm.
But what were the people who were opposed to that doing? We ask that question, and we ask that question because we inherently know that just because you did not act does not mean
Mhm.
that you are not complicit.
Yeah. 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 Because what you were doing was, I didn't see it. I didn't see it because I
Right.
really like my stuff.
Hmm.
I didn't see it. And I don't,
Right.
I like my stuff.
Right.
Um, yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. So I'm not going to ask you to retell the story of dinner and a stone because I'm certain just reading through that chapter, I alluded to earlier, I haven't listened to any other episodes that you've been on, but it is a different enough thing for people that I can't think that you haven't been asked about that. And so I don't want you to retell that story. And
Yeah.
for people that are like, why is he being so vague? Buy the damn book. So there's that. But it is a wonderful story. But I am curious about like the voice and the role of prophecy in people's lives today, regardless of their connectedness to a local church.
Yeah.
Um, and then I have another question after, because
Yeah.
I thought about this question driving home from vacation. But what is kind of the role of that? And also, I guess, how do you respond to it? You know?
This is a I'll be really honest about this. Like, so when we talk about that experience, people do talk of they compare it to kind of like a prophetic call narrative from, scripture or something like that. And
Mhm.
um I am super uncomfortable like with, the idea of like me standing in that tradition with other people who do sometimes, either say, okay, Andre is prophetic or Andre is a prophet. And I think for good reason, right? Like
Mhm.
I grew up in the Assemblies of God. I know how weird people can be, about
Mhm.
stuff like that. I think what makes me feel more comfortable with sharing that stuff in the book is the fact that like I had no idea what I believed about God, right? Like, and I
Mhm.
had no idea what I believed about spirituality, and I had this weird mystical experience and felt like I was supposed to do it, and I did. So I don't come out as like, look at me, mighty man of faith and power, with divine secrets or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I will say though, oh my gosh. When I started really wrestling with the role of Christianity in the very things that I'm writing about in this book, the role of Christianity in the construction of this system of systemic racism, in the supporting of police brutality, which I take personally. I feel distressed about this in my body. Every day I wake up, with this burden of trying to figure out like how can we fix this? How can I live in a safer world? That the prophets of the Hebrew Bible were some of the only folks from that canon that made sense to me. You know,
Mm. Mhm.
um, not just because they do things like carry 100-pound boulders around and stuff like that to deliver a message, but because they are connecting what it means to they connect justice and righteousness,
Mm.
right? And they say that these things are inseparable, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Y That's basically their message. You religious people say that you are right with God and you do all this ritual stuff, you know,
Mhm.
but what God really wants is for us to treat each other well,
Yeah.
you know?
And y'all
And
all keep messing around, and you're about to find out. You better.
yeah, and treating each other well includes, like, taking care of the widow and the orphan and all that kinda stuff, like, they really did, and so, I do think that, 'cause you asked, like, what do I think the role of that is,
Hmm.
right? You
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, and I
And
don't mean it in a congregational way. So you were talking about kinda your,
yeah,
like, church upbringing was I think it's you said Assemblies of God. So I'm, like, Southern Baptist is what I was raised. So, like,
right.
anything that is not, the God-inspired five-point Calvinist view is definitely gonna make my boots shake. Now that was the 15-year-old goal, 20-year-ago me. Now I'm
Yeah.
like, "Heck no, give me the mystical." Like, this is freaking amazing. Like 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 the love that I'm turning into somehow runs and outpaces an expanding universe and light. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. And you want to try to systematically theologize it. Like this, what do you
Well, yeah.
stop being stupid.
And honestly, I think that that is kind of the interesting thing to me is that like I didn't experience that within the context of a congregation.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I experienced that as someone who considered himself at the time an atheist, you know,
Yeah.
and yeah, so when you talk about the role of that kind of person in the world, I first off have evolved a lot in my thinking of understanding that the idea of prophets and prophecy, first off, don't belong to any Christian tradition, right?
Mm,
They are truth tellers, right? And they have come up in all kinds of cultures and all kinds of traditions and all that kind of stuff. And we need them, right? We need those types of figures. I think that Dr. King is one of them. Dr. King was one of those kinds of figures who, even though he was connected to congregational life, I kept thinking about when I started really studying him, how like this man was standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial
mm,
quoting Isaiah, you
mm,
know?
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot about like how Eugene Peterson wrote in one of his books, Run with the Horses, I think it was, that a prophet has, from his understanding, him being a Christian, the prophet has a Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, right? And you're trying to what I think about this is that basically, and I think I'm kind of paraphrasing Walter Brueggemann with this, is that really like prophets are just trying to really concretize, these things that we say about God, right? Within the context of our moment in history,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Like if we really are saying that the greatest command that God gives to those who are in either the Jewish or Christian tradition is to love your neighbor as yourself, then that command has something to do with the headline that Philando Castile bled to death in front of his girlfriend and their 4-year-old daughter.
in a car. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. By following, for those that forget that story, by literally doing what he was supposed to do and telling them that he had a concealed handgun and he was not going to get it. And
Mhm.
anyway, like literally following the training, and it didn't freaking matter. And a 4-year-old had to watch somebody get, um, I don't think you can say the word murdered. I think you get in trouble for that.
You do
Um,
get in trouble for that. I
yeah.
learned that from writing this book, from the
I
legal read.
don't know why. I have friends that are lawyers, and they're like, "Yeah, you can't say that." Because I said it once at the bank, and they're like, "You're gonna get fired. You can't say that." I was like, "The what?"
I know.
Anyway, yeah. So that seems exhausting. So you referenced prophets. It feels like honestly, it feels like a crappy life. Like people that are telling the truth. It feels like an awful way to live, which sounds stupid to say out loud, but it feels like exhausting. And
Yeah.
then
Can I
you know,
talk about that a little bit?
yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah,
I would kinda like to comment on that.
yeah. Not that you shouldn't tell the truth, but like it just seems so countercultural to the way that people live.
Well, yeah, like, well, there is one thing about saying the uncomfortable truth. It's saying the thing that a lot of people don't wanna hear and a lot of other people are afraid to say, right?
Mm,
Like, that is kind of the essence of it a lot. And it's funny because, like, I kind of just think of it as, like, me being Jamaican. This is something that people don't know about Jamaican culture is that Jamaicans are very direct people.
mm,
We're just very direct people, we're very honest. But there's a deep prophetic tradition, I believe, also in Jamaican freedom fighters and reggae musicians, which, I come from. My father's a reggae musician and he was an anti-imperialist activist
mm,
in his youth. So that's a part of it. But so part of it is, you're saying things that are hard, right? And that people, the powers that be are deeply invested in not, having aired out. But I think for me personally, if I can talk personally about it, I think that there's this also, it's not just like the being attuned to what's going on in the world and feeling deeply about it, and feeling compelled to say things even when you're kind of like, man, like why can't I just like
Mm,
not, like it's hard to control that, not control that impulse, but to not respond. But I think another layer that I just want to add to that is the feeling that it's such a big assignment, it feels like, and I do not feel like I am the person that should be doing that, you
mm,
know?
yeah.
And I'm sure there are a lot of people who agree with, I know there are a lot of people who agree with me. Like, they're like, you know? But I find that throughout, and the tradition I'm familiar with is Christian, the Christian Bible. I find that there's no one that God comes to in scripture when God says, "Hey, you, I want you to be the spokesperson for that," and they go, "Okay." Like
Mm-mm,
I can't
mm-mm.
think of one. Every one of them tries to get out of the job,
Yeah.
and I have I have in my life um, experienced that a lot, where I have just been like, on the one hand, I don't feel like it should be. I don't feel like I should be counted among people who do that work. I don't feel worthy to do it, you know.
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
And then also it's like, man, like I take no pleasure in doing it,
Mm,
basically.
yeah. So hope. So you talked a bit about some of the you listed off Martin Luther King and a bunch of other people as well. It feels like I heard it. So here we go. Let me try to frame it this way. And this is one of the few questions that I actually pose, though I'm going to say it in a different way or try to. So I heard I do a 35, 40-minute drive on the way into work every day. And it said that apparently, ex-President Trump is apparently the front runner as it stands now
Yep.
for, which is it's ridiculous.
Yep.
Regardless of your politics, like it's just ridiculous. Um, that is not me either saying go Biden. Not a huge fan of Biden either for those listening. So here we go. Um, Things were worse then. Like so many of my close friends, um, it was just it was just worse overall. And it feels like hope, like having hope that things are going to continue to move in a trajectory of shalom
Mm,
feels like an anchor of pain, like an anchor that is just like I don't see it ever getting better, regardless of which way we go.
mm,
And I don't even know if that's a question. I guess more your thoughts on that. Like that's like after like I've read books like yours, I read your book, I read the news, and I'm like, I'm not freaking hopeful
mm,
that like I'm not. And hope I think should come with joy.
mhm.
And right now it feels more like an iceberg, like just moving us towards a shipwreck. Um, Thoughts at all?
Well, I mean, yeah, it is super discouraging that Trump is the front runner.
Mm,
It's not surprising,
mm,
right? Like people have been saying since he started talking about running in 2015, like we've the word the word fascism has kind of, been having a moment for a while. And what I believe that we are living through what many other Black thinkers throughout history have named as kind of this preventive fascist reflex that the white world has to Black uprisings for racial justice.
mm,
Um, I used to talk about this as like we have this forward, one step forward, two steps back motion, going on toward racial progress. But just through studying more and more and more, it seems like no, it's actually more accurate to say that we have these anti-racist mobilizations that are countered by racist mobilizations.
mm,
you know?
mm,
And we have been living through we lived through one, which was Trump's first presidency, right?
mm,
Because when Barack Obama was elected as president, we all felt like that was a huge leap forward for racial progress. And even though, listen, if it's a white supremacist state and you're in charge of it, you still got to do some white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? You know,
The way you say that, we still gonna have to.
you got to do some white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? Like if you change the bus driver, the bus doesn't become a helicopter. You still you got to do what the bus does. You know. So, but regardless, symbolically, the election of a black president, that I think that felt like a bridge. No, I don't think, I know it felt like a bridge too far for many white people.
Mhm.
And they were willing to give the presidency to anybody, which is anyone white,
Yeah. Yeah.
and male, any white
Yeah.
male.
No females allowed.
Yeah.
Definitely
I
not.
mean, because again, white supremacy is also patriarchal inherently, and I'm actually quoting, when I say that, I'm actually quoting the secession papers, which I think were from Texas.
Mhm.
Like a part of, I think I'm quoting Texas secession papers during the Civil War when I say that. So anyway, we lived through one, right? Well, a couple years ago, we had the largest nonviolent mobilization in recent history, the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm.
And we are living through more fascist counter revolution right now with what's going on, throughout American society. You can see with the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court hearings lately and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I understand it's discouraging.
Mm.
For me, hope is not about believing that somehow, some way, this will work out good. you know, I am hopeful in the sense that I understand that there is something that we can do to fight against the the ongoing project of colonialism that this nation was founded under and continues to operate in many ways. There is something that we can do to counter this growing, this growing fascist revival. There's something we can do to confront authoritarianism or totalitarianism if it goes that way, and that is nonviolent civil resistance, which has been effective in all of these situations throughout the world and throughout history. It's not like a guarantee. It's not like, you press a row of buttons and, you activate the civil resistance movement and we all live happily ever after. But, but,
What state is the button in? North
but,
Dakota.
but according to a study from Erica Chenoweth that studied, 627 conflict situations between 1900 and 2019, nonviolent civil resistance movements have been effective 50% of the time.
Mm. Mm. Is that the same study that you wrote about where it says like only like 3-4% of people are required?
Yeah. And
that swings both ways though, right? So like people that are like, yeah, I like fascism. I like this flex. Yes. It goes both ways, right?
Right, exactly. The 3.5% rule does not, it's not sentient, right? Like it's not like, it's not only choosing the folks who are for freedom.
Mm.
And so this is what we have to understand, is that it isn't so much that those who want the oppressive status quo just inherently hold more power. Power is not an object that can be held in that way. It's diffuse. It runs throughout the population. But it is that we're being out organized.
Mm.
The folks who want the things that have been the way that they out organize those of us who, tweet about the world that we want. Hands down. They're much better at organizing.
Tweets don't count?
They count, but but on the scale of escalating tactics to actually interrupt, racist power, tweets are not the most powerful things we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe show up to your local school board and city council meetings and use your voice there.
And organize with some folks in the street and shut cities down until they meet your demands. You know what I'm saying? Like, just like they did in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And that's partly why I wrote this book, is because the stakes are getting higher and higher.
Mm-hmm.
that's how I feel. When I first started, I was like, "Oh, what relevance is this book going to have to anyone?" you
Mhm.
know, if it's about my story alone. But as I began to write and to share, the insight that I've gleaned over the years about civil resistance, I realized, oh my gosh, like we totally need this information because the folks who are so committed to white supremacy that, as Dr. King said, they're not interested in democracy if it includes racial equality.
Yeah.
They are going to continue to organize. And if we really pay attention to the way that they were talking about the coup on January 6th, like, well, I can't remember his wife's name, Clarence Thomas's wife, uh,
Oh, God, I'd have to Google it. I know
Jenny.
who you're talking about.
Yeah, I can't remember,
I am
but
gonna it's bothering me now.
yeah, the way that they were trying to put pressure on the media to support
Virginia.
Virginia, you know,
Jenny. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that the way that they were trying to put pressure on the media to support this effort, shows that, like, they are thinking in an organized, systemic, institutional kind of way. They're thinking in a collective way about how to make this happen. Uh, we who believe in freedom have to also understand that we have to do more than just throw our anti-racist values at people who are literally, organizing to suppress the vote, organizing to expand gerrymandering, organizing to pack the Supreme Court, organizing to reinstall their white nationalist sympathizer of a president back in office.
Hmm. Hmm. And for those that think gerrymandering isn't real anymore, you can look up, is it North Carolina that still hasn't been allowed to vote in their own primary because their Supreme Court has, do you know what I'm talking about or no?
I've only heard about this.
Yeah, the Republicans tried to redraw the maps, and literally everyone was like, "Look, if you do this, there's like we have a conservative Supreme Court here in Carolina, and this isn't
Yeah,
going to work. Like this is so bad. This is not going to work."
yeah,
They did it anyway. It got kicked back. They did it again. They're like, we tried to do it better. See how we move that one line? We're cool now. Still didn't work. And so now they're talking about, yeah, we might not be having any elections in the primary. And like the people that are running, like if you were running, Andre, you're like, I don't know what my district is. So I have these signs that I would like you to display. I need you to tell me the yards that people put these signs in because I don't actually know who my constituents are, which
mhm.
is funny that someone's still going to get elected. And I don't even know what their platform is because they have no idea the people that they supposedly represent. But anyway, that is neither here nor there.
So the
Um,
hope part that I see in this though is that, honestly, I think that people have this misconception that, uh, first off, that we can affect change without organizing civil resistance campaigns. And I wrote this book to say, no, that's not how it works. We actually need civil resistance campaigns. But a misconception around nonviolent civil resistance is that it works in the more democratic a society is,
mm,
right? And actually, a part of me, I know this is going to sound crazy, but sometimes I think to myself, what if we had just let Donald Trump keep the presidency? You know,
mm.
like, we would have fundamentally not been democratic anymore. I mean, I argue in chapter 8 that we have
I'm
always
not
had
sure we are right now,
yeah, we
but
had a deep anti-democratic tradition from the start. But, for the sake of how we talk about things, what if we just went ahead and just let it happen? Like, that might have been the wake-up call that we needed to actually organize the thing, because I say that because I'm I have seen in my studies, and I know people who have fought against regimes that are way less democratic than ours,
mm,
and they have won.
mm,
So in a sense, just because things appear to be getting worse doesn't mean that our chances decrease. In fact, they might increase. They might.
mm,
you know.
mm,
Now, I don't
mm.
want for us to go there. I don't want for us to live under a totalitarian dictatorship or, a completely authoritarian state or something like that. But I know that even if we do, that it will still hold true that 3.5% of the population in sustained, active, nonviolent struggle using strategic plans and not just going out and protesting and using signs and all that kind of stuff, but organizing strikes and boycotts and things like that.
Mhm.
That force is still powerful enough to change that situation.
Yeah. Now, you don't know this, Andre, but the listeners do. But so for those that are listening now and you're like, wait, pause. So I transcribe these because I don't need anything else to do with my time. And so I will link to the study right wherever you just said that word.
Yeah,
But for those that are too lazy to read, either your book or the study itself, I went and I read the study, and it's effectively, if I'll try to paraphrase it, it's effectively you got to stop trying to bang your head against the wall, convincing someone of any end means. It doesn't matter if it's racism or if it's
mhm,
capitalism or bust or socialism or bust, or pick whatever the boogeyman is that you want to fight about. It makes no sense to continue to argue with anyone. Actually, most science shows the harder you argue with someone, they just dig further into their biases and stop listening even harder. And you get things like, Pizzagate and that kind of garbage.
mhm,
That all you have to do is try to lean into the people that are like, and you referenced them earlier, the people like, not everybody is putting people in gas chambers, but so you just
right.
have to focus on those people that are like, oh, I might would say something if I knew what to say. Like, you just need to convince those people and point them in the right direction and say, here, you can just walk with me and
Yep,
we'll do this together.
yep.
That's a badly way paraphrasing a long study and a long chapter. Um, I am going to forego one of my other questions because I've already jeopardized an hour of your time. And for those listening, like, the question that I'll tell you what, I'm gonna ask the question, and you can tell people to buy the book, or you can answer the question because I still
Okay.
have one other question that I ask everyone that I'm excited for your answer. So you write in Breaking Up with White Jesus,
Mhm.
what if Christianity is for white people? I ask myself, what if they made up this religion to serve their interests? Um, I think the answer is yes, because of
Mhm,
things like the doctrine of discovery and a
mhm,
bunch of other garbage.
mhm.
Um, do you want to answer that, or we can just punt? um,
I mean, I think it's very simple that there are Christianities in the world, right?
hmm,
There is no one Christianity in the world, and so, yes, there is one way of answering that says, yeah, of course, yeah, the white supremacist, you know, the white supremacist horror story that we call Christianity, yeah, it was created for white people.
hmm,
But there are also, Christians who walked the Trail of Tears with indigenous people. There are Christians who led abolitionist uprisings. There are Christians who knocked on doors, and tried to win people over to the abolitionist cause. Dr. King's Christianity is not is not the Pope's Christianity. And so, yeah, there definitely is, and there definitely are Christianities that were invented by white people to serve the interests of white people. And luckily, they're not the only ones out there.
yeah, yeah, and I'd also pivot to say the bulk of Christians don't live in America. There
Mm,
is a massive church. If you would just freaking look and read some texts that don't come from publishers in the United States, not you
mhm,
specifically, Andre, but to
mhm.
people listening. Um, so you're an artist. You sing songs and write words. I know the power of saying things out loud and how having to think about them changes the meaning sometimes, especially as you change into a different person.
Yeah.
How was reading the audiobook, because I think it's you, how did it change your relationship to these words, like in the way that you feel about them?
Yeah. I can't say that it really changed the way my relationship to them, especially because a part of my writing the book included, like, in the editing process, literally reading it out
Mm,
loud, reading every word out loud, and trying to make sure that every single sentence feels right, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um, but I will say that I didn't get to hear the audiobook, after recording it, so I actually, like, when it came out, I bought it.
Have you listened to it?
Yeah, I have listened. I don't know if I don't remember if I listened to the whole thing, but I did listen to some of it.
What's funny is your voice is like half an octave lower in that. And there's like a bit more bass in it. They cleaned it up. There's some mixing going on there.
Yeah, I wonder if they boosted it. I mean, I also kinda had my I don't know if I can do it, but, like, yeah. chapter 1, you know? Like, I
Yeah.
was in some other kind of mode doing it, and then I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, did I read my book just like other audiobooks that I've heard?" You know? Did I try to become someone else when I read it? But I will say that, like, I read the book so many times that I knew that when it was published, like, I'm probably never gonna read it, right? Like, um, but I was curious about what the audiobook sounded like because, I went into the studio for 2 days and I did it and I left, and so I did listen to some of it, and I will say that listening back to it, I don't know, it feels like somebody else, It feels like somebody else did all of this work, um,
Yeah.
but I'm just happy that it's out there in the world.
Yeah. So one of the questions I ask everyone, and you've already answered this multiple times, so you don't have to. I'll just say the question is, what are the things that we need to talk about at church, which is the book, like the things that matter for church. Is there anything that you did not put in this book that you're like, yeah, this, if I could write another chapter, and if there's something that we should be allowed to say in church, not as a clergy, but as a
Mm.
human being that stands up and is like, y'all, stop it. Like, this needs to happen tomorrow. Is there anything that maybe you didn't get, or the editor's like, yeah, you can't put that in there because if you put that in there, we're not publishing the book. Like, is there anything that you're like, now this needs to be discussed and it needs to be discussed immediately?
Well, there's nothing that they said, okay, they won't publish the book about, but there was a whole section about, like, how so one of the chapters, I think it was the Black Love chapter, the beginning of that originally was, "I don't hate white people, but I did for 15 minutes in a church service."
Mm,
And I talked about a church that I had visited where it was actually during communion. So I felt like such a terrible person because I'm sitting here and I'm the only black person in the room that I remember. And I'm just seeing all these white people going up and getting communion. And I'm just like, oh, I'm just so full of rage. Because I was thinking about how this is this ritual where you all assure yourselves that all of your sins are forgiven, all that kind of stuff. And what does it mean to be an innocent person in a society where you know that all of this violence is going on in the background, right?
mm, mm,
Um, and I'll say that a part of my anger came from the fact that at the time, it just seemed so obvious that these institutions that have so many resources, including people, volunteers, leaders, money, land, buildings, even ideology, iconography, mythology, symbol, all this stuff, would not lean in to what is like the social problem of the day and organize those resources to intervene,
mm,
you know? And one of my fears with this book is that people will walk away and the only thing that they'll pull away with is, oh, that was well written, or um, man, Andre's good at writing, or what an interesting story. Because I could have written a book for our entertainment,
mm,
right? But instead, I wrote a book that is trying to mainstream some of the stuff that we talked about today, like the spectrum of support, the 3.5% rule, the effectiveness of nonviolent civil resistance, the usefulness of polarization, all these things that could help us to build stronger civil resistance campaigns. Because the truth is, right now, and I talked to Erica Chenoweth about this, the one who did that study, she and her research partner, Maria J. Steffen, and she told me that around the world right now, we're losing more battles through nonviolent struggle than we're winning.
mm,
And the reason why is not because of something inherent in the nonviolent approach, but it's because the information about the breadth of tactics that there are to use and the strategies that are more disruptive and how to do that it's becoming less and less known. It's becoming less and less common. And this is, from my vantage point, I don't see another weapon that is as powerful and as accessible as nonviolent civil resistance to us.
mhm,
Anyone can participate in it. You don't have to have a national sponsor to provide you with weapons to try to, fight the U.S. Army, or something like that. Like, um, it creates more stable democracies in their wake. Like there's so much to it. And so the thing that I would say is that we need to be talking about in church right now. As I say this, I have an image of the church in South Africa during apartheid, you know,
Mm,
at least Desmond Tutu's, you know,
mhm. Yeah.
uh, tradition. I think that we are going to need to think of like how what does our life look like in the context of these neo-fascist, counter revolutions that are going on. And
Mm,
what if they succeed,
mm,
Because I have been of the opinion, and I could be wrong. I hope that I'm not. I hope that I'm wrong, you know. But I said if Donald Trump wins that election in 2020, we're not having elections for a while,
mm.
you know.
Yeah, I've had the same thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had the same thought. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think that churches really need to, or it would be, maybe I shouldn't say they need, but churches have an opportunity to use those resources and to help build the skills and knowledge around nonviolent civil resistance that we need to intervene against that power that is trying to be established.
Mm, mm. That, however, will require the people that attend that church to be willing to do that work
That's
and
true.
not just fire pastors. Um,
That's true.
they have to be willing. I've seen it firsthand where people are like, "Yeah, we're not doing that." I
Mhm,
liked what you said, but we're not doing that.
mhm, mhm.
Um, when you try to drape words around whatever God is for you, what is that?
God is a mystery to me, and I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
You know, that really is what I feel. And I was a pastor for a while, and I remember, getting paid, in many ways to have answers about all of the mysteries of, you know, this this universe that we live in. And I have found so much freedom. Like I write about in the book about kind of coming out into the wide open space of I know that a lot of the things that I was taught is bullshit. I don't know for sure. I don't know that I can identify every single point that is bullshit or not, you know? And so and so I'm kind of fine just living with this big, like, I don't know about this, I don't know about that, I'm not certain about this, I'm not certain about that, but I talk to God every day,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you actually, that's one of the few pictures that I took a picture of and then decided not to post it anywhere because I took the picture before your book was released. I think you say in the Gaslight chapter, I have to find the picture. Here it is. Better to save our energy, call bullshit, and just keep it moving. Um, so just keep it. I think that's what you say, something like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. Andre, I've enjoyed talking with you. And
same.
again, I wish that I had like 4 hours with you because we didn't touch like I don't know. We talked about like 36 pages of your book, um, of a book that's got 200 something pages in it. So, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank
Very much. So I enjoyed the talk.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, good deal. Let me